Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Rocket Summer, a brand new BookTube event created by the one and only Michael K. Vaughan, designed to celebrate classic science fiction. So, science fiction from its earliest beginnings, which you'll usually think of as H.G. Wells and Jules Verne, or Mike's own beloved Edgar Rice Burroughs, and extending all the way to 1970, to the year 1970. After which, in science fiction, as in every other part of life, everything went to hell. This is a terrific event. It's lots and lots of fun. I'm one of the co-hosts. I'm having a blast. Even though I'm not making a video for every book, I'm having a blast, and I want to make videos for every book for the rest of the month, if I can. Because my science fiction, my Rocket Summer, has taken an odd turn. I love BookTube events for exactly this reason, because you never know what's going to happen. You can increase your odds that your BookTube event will take an unexpected turn if you completely ignore the rules of your BookTube event, as I have been doing. But I love it when BookTube events do this. When they suddenly take on a life of their own and start teaching me things. I love that. In Rocket Summer, on paper anyway, on the blueprints, we are supposed to be following science fiction through its progression through the decades. Starting at the turn of the 20th century and moving our way through the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, of course the 50s, early 60s, the explosion of creativity in the mid and late 60s. We're supposed to be following science fiction as it grows as a genre. And I'm not doing that for two reasons. One is just serendipity. The chips didn't fall that way, and I'm too happy with the results to change it back. And two, I know this is a little hard to believe for a wavy-haired, 8-pack ab, 28-year-old sexy influencer, but I largely followed the growth of science fiction across those decades myself. So recapitulating that in an event doesn't have quite the same archaeological interest that it might have for my younger co-hosts. So instead, I've just been looking at science fiction novels from all across those decades. And the one thing that has surprised me is that I've been drawn to fairly major science fiction novels that I had read once, maybe even read twice. In the case of Stranger in a Strange Land, read many times. But quite a few of them only once or twice, or even only once. Today's is only once. I've only read it once. And like these things, know the standing they have in the genre, but have never really gone back to them. And that's odd, considering how much I love to reread. So I'm having a blast. Absolute blast with science fiction in the heat of summer, just as Rocket Summer intended, even though I'm not following the rules. And today we're going back to 1955, so we're still a good 15 years away from the end of our restrictive time period. But I think on the 11th of July, I think 1955 is probably still a little bit too late. I should probably be reading earlier works. All those earlier 35-cent pulp paperbacks that I bought for this purpose. And I'm not going to them. Instead, I'm going to well-known items. And that's what we're doing today. We're doing Lee Brackett's novel, The Long Tomorrow, which is a post-apocalyptic novel that I read once with this cover a long time ago, in which, in a future world, a major political party, you can differentiate them because they wear red hats and red ties, neckties, that extend all the way to their knees. So impractical as dress items go, but still, that's how you identify them. They swept to power on a promise of stripping everyone who voted for them of free health care, and also of a promise of abolishing any kind of vaccine mandate. So your crazy neighbor is perfectly free to send his young child who is suffering from the measles to elementary school with your child. Rather than any kind of state or federal agency saying, no, I'm afraid as a public service, as a public health gesture, you have to have your children vaccinated against these potentially lethal diseases for which we have completely effective and painless free vaccines. That party swept to power along those lines, science denying, vaccine denying, pretty adjacent to round Earth denying, to heliocentrism denying, certainly denying any kind of cataclysmic climate change. And the result was, oh no, wait. Wait. In Lee Brackett's novel, it's a nuclear war. So it's not, sorry, I don't know why my mind went down that line. I don't know what I was thinking. No, in Lee Brackett's novel, it's a nuclear war that wipes a huge part of humanity off the face of the earth. This is not On the Beach by Neville Shute. This is not dealing with deadly clouds of radiation that are going to destroy everybody anyway. There are survivors. But they don't trust technology. The people who survive don't trust technology. The United States, as a political entity, survives. And the people in America don't trust technology. Instead of blaming the men behind the launch orders, they blame the tech. They blame the weapons instead of the weapon wielders. And so they intentionally embrace a low-tech, anti-tech worldview, where they will not have any sophisticated computers, they will not have any sophisticated communications, they won't have any sophisticated medicine, they won't even have sophisticated cities. The law in this new United States is that your city can only be a certain size, that only so many buildings can exist. No sprawl, no congestion, no nothing like that. A simpler, more rustic time as a giant defense spasm against the technology that was vilified, that was made into the villain of this story. So basically, what we have for the premise of this book is a kind of Earthborn Butlerian Jihad from Frank Herbert's novel Dune, where technology is spurned. And naturally, the two characters in the book who are most curious about the technology that has been spurned are our two main characters, Esau and Len. They're young boys, and they are curious about everything that is forbidden, of course, as young boys are. Even though they see how brutal their society can be. The enforcement mechanisms for a lot of things here, for a lot of suspicions of outsiders, are pretty draconian. They're violence, they're death, and these boys know that. They are, in the course of the novel, they are beaten and whipped several times for even minor transgressions. They're still curious to know about all of that forbidden tech, especially about a rumored place, Barterstown, where not only does that tech all reside, but where people openly use it. And they meet a trader, Trader, a trader in goods and services named Hofstadter, who at first seems fairly one-dimensional and also fairly above board. We learn in the course of the novel that he is neither of those things. The relationships that grow up between Esau and Len and Hofstadter are very interestingly done in this book. Of course, the boys set out, right? You can't have a novel like this without the young main characters setting out. I don't think they wave a map in the air and say, I'm going on an adventure, but they do go on adventures. And you know, in the first 100 pages of this book, you know the shape of those adventures. You know, for instance, that the novel is going to bring them to Barterstown, and you can guess, especially if you know what a smart writer Lee Brackett is, that Barterstown will not be what they're expecting at all, that it will be the darker, worser version of anything that they could expect, that it certainly won't be a relief from the fake, idyllic setting of their upbringing. And that all turns out to be true. I liked it. This reread was my first in decades. The length of time between the last time I read this thing and now is longer than a lot of you have been alive. And it made me a little guilty. All of these Rocket Summer rediscoveries are making me feel a little guilty at rediscovering a lot of these authors. I now want to read a lot of Lee Brackett. I've read a lot of Lee Brackett, but I think it went in one ear and out the other. Or maybe there were things that I liked, short stories especially, that I liked, but I'm going to have to go and find this author because science fiction is not going to present her to me. There is no great big, beautifully designed collected short stories of Lee Brackett. The Long Tomorrow, her most technically assured and probably most popular novel, out of print. I doubt that it will ever come back into print. And everything else, all the rest of what she wrote, I'm going to have to go and find her because science fiction has forgotten. Science fiction tends to forget its forebears. I thought this was really good, although I thought it was overlong. I don't think this was more than a short story. Esau and Len have too many adventures. Their love stories are a little bit contrived. Hofstadter's story is the most interesting one, but it too is contrived. It too is... This is one of those science fiction novels where by the halfway point you know everything that's going on. You know the setup, you know the real setup, you know the reveals. And then all you're left with is plot. And sometimes when you get a science fiction novel like that, with certain science fiction authors, some of whom Leigh Brackett knew quite well in and out of the bedroom, you'll be fine. In some vintage science fiction novels, when the author has done the science fiction part and is now on the plot, you'll be just fine. It doesn't work quite so well here. When the science fiction starts to drop away, Leigh Brackett seems desperate to bring in more science fiction. An energy shield against nuclear war, as if this world could present nuclear war to Barterstown. Probably a reflection of the era in which this was written, 1955. Anxiety over nuclear war was starting to take hold. It was starting to be felt, especially with future-thinking minds in the science fiction community. Again, if you were born in the 21st century, you won't have any idea. On a visceral level, you won't have any idea how much we all lived with nuclear war in our heads. 1955, it was still possible to turn a blind eye. After the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was not. After that, you lived with nuclear war in your mind at all times. I guess maybe if you were born in the 21st century, or you did most of your growing up in the 21st century, that has been replaced by terrorism because of 9/11. Or maybe even in the benighted year 2024, maybe it's been replaced by mass shootings. I don't know. The United States just recently very narrowly escaped a horrific mass shooting that would have had dozens and dozens of victims. Just barely escaped it. If the events just a day ago or 2 days ago had gone different in a slight fraction of a way, they would have been filling trucks with dead bodies. And everybody in America knows that when you set foot outside your door, or if you're a black person, if you simply stay indoors, you could face that kind of random gunfire at any time. Certainly it has to be a thought on the mind of anybody who goes to a rock concert, or a political demonstration, sporting event, anything that draws these nutcases with their military-grade weapons. And whatever it is, whether it's terrorism or mass shootings or whatever, that kind of omnipresent background worry is probably what causes Leigh Brackett to have Barterstown have the preoccupations that it does with nuclear weapons and nuclear war. Seems like the last thing they would be thinking about in the context of the book that she has written. It seems like the last thing they'd be worried about. I think you'd think they'd be much more worried about food and water or agriculture than nuclear war. But the world building, even in the last part of this book, the last third of this book, is still really good. It has that draggy feeling where the writing never flags for a minute, but that draggy feeling where you think this could have been shorter. This meeting could have been a memo, that sort of thing. It's cruel, but nevertheless, I did feel that this time around, and I felt it more strongly than I did the first time I read this book. I think because in the interval, I've read a lot more of Leigh Brackett's short work. And it's really, really good. So I don't remember off the top of my head real science fiction nerds from this time period, older science fiction nerds. Again, Stephen E. Andrews, our outlaw bookseller, might know whether or not the germ of The Long Tomorrow started as a short story. It feels like it did. But I'm not remembering off the top of my head if it did or not. But anyway, this is a well-known novel, or it was at one point, and it's my next conquest for Rocket Summer, which is so much fun. Who knows what I'll do tonight? The Long Tomorrow is a fairly major book, and that was wonderful to just experience it again, to just open it up and drop my long-standing preconceptions. If you have reactions to a book that are 45 years old, it's time to read that book again. All you've got left is reactions. The book has leached away, fossilized. So it's time to read that book again and read it fresh. So who knows? Do I dare? Do I dare to reread tonight maybe a book where my initial reactions were far worse, were intensely negative and have remained so this whole time? Do I dare to do that? I think there's one science fiction name that's coming to some of your minds. Mine too. Maybe I will. I will figure it out later today, and I'll report back. Thank you, BookTube.